Does it matter where I stand? Hello? Can I speak from this mic? Good morning and welcome to our session on adapting nature to protect our heritage. And we're talking in particular about natural heritage today. There are various forms of cultural heritage, tangible, intangible, and natural, and generally they're all combined together. But we want to look at how climate adaptation can be used using nature-based solutions and thinking about nature as the culture that we would like to protect. So our feeling is that climate adaptation doesn't always put cultural heritage, whatever kind it is, as a priority. And so this might be a way of encouraging technical work to be thinking more sensitively about the cultural aspects of the outcomes. So I also work for a project called SD Wishes, which is a research project looking at how different projects around Europe and beyond are looking at R&I in this sector. And it's a very confined a sector looking at water, climate and cultural heritage. And we're looking at some of the barriers to getting investment into this area in terms of research. So we're going to deal with some of those issues today. And I'd like to first of all introduce our keynote speaker, Professor Eddy Moors, who is not only the head of IHE Delft in the Netherlands, but also professor in water and climate at the Free University. And I'm sure he has some very insightful comments on how some of the barriers that we have to investment in this area. Thank you, Eddy.
So thank you, Amanda, and it's last day of the Stockholm Water Week. So that means that there is always an extra challenge to the people that are in a room actually to also bring in the energy. We're with a quite small group, and I think also on behalf of the moderator, I think you're all free actually to interact, and maybe even if you feel up to that, walk around, because we are all sitting quite a lot this week. So if you feel an urge to stand up and walk around, please do so. What I will try to do is I will say a few words that I think could be an introduction also for the discussion that we can have together about this topic. And I was very interested and inspired by the fact that Amanda invited me to give a talk, while I did not feel personally that I was the super expert to do something like that. But still, I have some ideas about it, and hopefully those ideas may either trigger you to say, yes, but this is a very stupid idea, or maybe it will trigger you and say, yeah, maybe I have something that will help to support this, what's happening there. So what I would like to start with is there is a lot of discussion going on, and I think if you look back maybe 1 or 2 years, there was a big discussion when we were developing towards the COP on climate change, but also the UN Water Conference that took place in New York in 2023. And then later on, we had the Biodiversity COP that took place in Cali. And in the development and the road towards these COPs, we are also talking about, okay, but it's nice that we do all those things together, but how can we bring them together and how can they support one another? And I think that was a bit of the ambition to do that. But if you look back, and I think the last COP that at least I was online participating in was the Biodiversity COP in Cali. The outcome of that was not that we were happy to know, okay, how are we going to implement that? And that is, I think, also a little bit the challenge of the discussion of today. Can we, maybe in a different approach, and that's the human rights approach, maybe push that in a certain way? So to set the scene a little bit on there, I've been involved, and you probably as well, on water, and then also on what's happening with food and energy. So that's one of the big nexus. I think the driving force behind this nexus and the way how this nexus is being used is actually in a financial way. So people translate actually the value of food, the value of energy, and the value of water in an economic value. And by doing that, you can also create a mechanism with which you can make a decision and which part you would like to support to see if the economic outcome of it is then the biggest benefits that you would like to have. Challenge there is that often the environmental side is actually not taken on board. One of the reasons for that is that sometimes much more difficult to express the environmental value already in an economic value. So that's often set aside. While I think we should try to do that, but maybe not through the economic lens. So we need a different approach there actually to assure that you can also weigh the importance of those different topics that is in there. In those nexus, climate change is often the driver. So climate change is pushing actually the fact that we need to make those decisions next to population growth about what we want to do and how we want to use the resources that we have. So if you look then backwards to what is coming out from Kali, you will probably see that if you look at the biodiversity side and if you want to make a decision how to support that, it's really clear, right, that there is a link to energy, there's a link to water, there's a link to food, there's a link to mental health. So all those things are there. The importance of that is also acknowledged, but the translation of that into real actions is lacking. And I think the barriers in there is a bit of a combination. It's a combination between one, the starting point is awareness, and not if everybody knows about why biodiversity, for example, is so important. But another one is that the governance in place. That's also quite different between the different countries that is there. And another one that's there, you then also need the financial instruments. So again, the governance and the legislation is playing an important part to see how and what you can do on that. So that's where I think this human rights perspective can maybe play a role in pushing this and helping this agenda forward there. But it will be a quite difficult one to look at. I do think that if you look at the human rights side, an important part that is sometimes also overlooked is maybe mental health. And I think mental health is something that for me could be a quite important trigger. Because I see this as an increasing, I think, phenomena that we have to deal with in a lot of communities. And I think bringing this card on the table, when you start talking about also human rights, that can play an important role. Now, another, I think, important part is the involvement of indigenous communities. And the reason why I'm saying that is because I do think that they are the communities that have a real good understanding of, say, the local specific conditions that are there. It's also about the carrying capacity that you can have in there. And I think often that's overlooked. Sometimes that's also quite difficult because what you see and will notice that a lot of legislation is at the national level, while if you look at what is needed, it's often very local information that you require. And there I think those communities could play, I think, an important role. And what I would like to stress there, that all of us, including me, we are also part of people living in a surrounding there. And so it's not as if we can push it through indigenous communities to take the responsibility there. We also have our own responsibility, and we're also part of what's happening in this environment. So I think we should take that role and that responsibility also to our own position and the role that we can play in there. Another, I think, quite important example for me is I'm next to what Amanda said, I'm also chairing an organization which is called the Global Water Museum Network. And this is a flagship project from UNESCO that started a couple of years ago. And one of the reasons why this flagship project came on board is, of course, we had this concern about climate change, what's happening there. But also we realized that what we need is actually a stronger link between the way how people feel about water and their actions. And we think that with water museums, so bringing children especially, but also hopefully often it's their grandparents that accompany children to a museum, and otherwise it's schools, but that they together, that they get a better understanding and a better mental link actually to the value of water, which is needed. And I think if you look at also what indigenous communities can contribute to, is also making clear what this value is and why we should not forget about it, and how we can use it also in a very positive way on building, hopefully also human rights perspectives on why biodiversity is such an important part. And then in the end, what comes to the table is, okay, then you have this awareness, but I think that's a starting point before you can translate that also in finance that you will need in the end also in a number of cases to support certain development. Because it's not only about keeping what we have, I think it's also about actually restoring a part that has been lost, but in a number of cases also to look at what we can build new, actually in a good and positive way. And just as one of the examples there, that's about nature-based solutions. It's a very broad term. You have a lot of different examples, and I think it will be interesting maybe also later for our discussion as well to also hear from you. What example is an appealing one to you? But it would be very nice to see in those nature-based solutions also if we can translate that in the value that it has for communities, but also if we can translate that into a value for maybe at the national level, because in the end that's also there where decisions are being made that may have an implication on what's happening on the ground at the local position. So with that, I would like to stop. I know that we will have some other discussions also about some examples, and I'm quite interested to also talk about concrete examples, because later on that may help also in the discussion to know where we're standing. So thank you, Amanda, for this opportunity.
Stay on stage. You can stay on. Hi, everyone. So my name is Maria Lindsley, and I work for the International Union for Conservation of Nature, and I'll be moderating the panel session now. So Eddie, please stay on here. You can't go down, and I want to invite the rest of the panelists to come up here with us. So we have Amanda, which started the session. We also have Alejandro Isa, who is the Global Head of our Environmental Law Center, and we have Professor Bradley Moggridge from the University of Technology, Sydney, who is also a Professor of Science and Associate Dean on Indigenous Leadership. So we have a great panel, and I think what's really great about this session is that it's set up to not be a bunch of slides and presentations, but we hope this is going to be a dialogue between these four people that have a lot of experience and have a lot to bring on the table on this topic and are very knowledgeable, but also with you, the audience, who's sitting here in the room and who probably have good case studies, even more experience on the topic. And that's why I'm saying that there will be Q&A, but I think rather than doing a Q&A at the end, I'd also appreciate, if you hear something that you want to comment on, if you have a case study that you feel you want to share, if there's anything that you want to sort of bring into the discussion, just give a little hand and we can give you a microphone and you can sort of integrate so it becomes a dialogue between not only the people on stage, but also in the room. And hopefully, for those online, it will also be a good opportunity. And we'll do a little Mentimeter at the end, towards the end, which also those online can participate and put some of their keywords and the information they want. So we're talking about culture, natural heritage in the water and climate field sector. And I think one of the key things that came out from what you were talking about is, how do we include this into all the other streams that are going on. So we're talking about investment and the importance of all these topics. And instead of having another stream, like obviously this is should be across all of the things that are going on in the water sector. So how do we include that, and how do we ensure that water, climate, culture, heritage is included in the water conversations, the water action that's happening? I don't know, anyone wants to go first?
I've got the mic, so I'll just give a very, very brief answer. So the research we've done with SD Wishes has shown that there's a number of barriers, and part of it is awareness that we need to do more work around cultural heritage as a goal rather than climate adaptation for its own sake. We do need to be thinking more sensitively about what we're trying to protect. But also the funding systems that are in place aren't designed around long-term sustainable projects. They're 3 to 4 years typically, and then the researchers move on to something else. So there needs to be a different way of thinking about how we invest in this area so that it's for the long term and that the communities themselves have some ownership over it so that it is able to be sustainable. Can I pass the mic? Would you like to answer?
I think this aspect is important. I think about the national landscape in Australia, but also internationally. I believe there's like an Indigenous cultural heritage at IUCN now, so that's great to hear. And I heard there's a couple of Aussies sitting in there, which is fantastic. But I suppose at a national level or a local level, culture and cultural heritage is not a priority, and you don't get the funding, you don't get the opportunity to protect culture. And you think about natural disasters and the increase that we're seeing across the globe, extreme events, they're coming harder and faster. Australia, on the eastern seaboard, we had 2 of the worst droughts on record in the last 30 years. So the impacts on culture would not be known. And then say we've had 2 of the worst floods on record on mid-northeast coast of Australia, a place called Lismore. They had 2 floods, 1 in 500-year floods, within a matter of 2 months. 2 of them. Mm-hmm. 1 in 500-year flood. So they should only happen every 500 years. They had 2 of them in 2 months. So I suppose we don't know the cost to culture and cultural heritage from those extreme events. There's an island within one of the rivers, and it's an Aboriginal community. There are other activities there, but that whole island was flooded, so people lost everything. So I suppose that human cost is also huge. So I think until we see cultural heritage as a way forward and a way to influence decision making, but also have funding to protect, then it'll just keep happening.
Thank you. I'm going to add another layer of complexity, perhaps, to the whole discussion. I think, Eddie, you already alluded to that, which is the governance aspect. And it has to do also with what you said and what you said, Amanda. And the fragmentation that we have, not only at the national level, with different laws addressing different issues, like the ones you have mentioned, but also at the international level. Think about the issues, that we are discussing here. We have the UNESCO Convention, we have the CBD with all these frameworks, we have the Climate Change Convention, we have the water, rivers, and so on. UNDRIP, yeah. And then we have, all the different laws at national level that replicate the same level of fragmentation that we have at the global level. So the question for me is how to overcome that fragmentation so that this nexus can really happen in practice, right? So tenure issues, access issues, the water law doesn't speak to the heritage law, and then think about the different processes that are put in place by all those different frameworks. And the institutional fragmentation, and this is what I think we need to do some homework if we really want to have something, to be said and this nexus to be implemented in practice. There is somebody from
Yes, please. Can we get the microphone?
Or perhaps use that mic and then we stand up here. Yeah.
And please say where you're coming from as well. Please say who you're representing.
PIN numbers for your credit cards, want everything.
I'm Phil Duncan. I'm a Kamilaroi man from the northwest slopes and plains of New South Wales, a little place called Moree. It's interesting. This is a great chat. The community Brad is alluding to sits on a major adjoining highway, major motorway. And when they upgraded it, they built the cul-de-sacs, and they didn't make them big enough. I've lived in that community for 10 years on the North Coast, and this is the only time that that community had to be moved from the island. So with the major rainstorms and the floods coming down, it was meeting high tides, so it was hitting a brick wall. But more importantly, the overbank flows that cascaded across that motorway and all the logs that came with it created these series of what we call beaver dams. So the water couldn't go anywhere else. And these people still can't go back to their homelands. And they are fisher people. The Richmond River sustains them. Their native veg sustains them. You know, one of their traditional foods is the cobra, which is the worm that lives inside.
Mangroves.
What are they called?
Mangroves.
That's him. Thank you, Cuz. But anyway, I just wanted to say this is great. And looking at nature-based solutions rather than the hard one is important, personally for me anyway, and I think for a lot of people. Thank you.
Excellent, thank you.
And maybe if I may add to that one, is what I experience also in different discussions there, is a lot of discussions about if we can prove actually the effectiveness of nature-based solutions, and also compared to say the grey solutions, and also what the financial cost and benefits are. Apologies. So for that, for me, also an open call actually to all of you that are involved in research like that. So please collect information on those issues, or see if you can start collecting that information, because I know that there are some research going on, but I think we need a much broader, I think, proof of how and where you can use those sort of solutions in there.
I just want to finish up by saying having you people talking about it and creating a safe environment to have the courageous conversation is just fantastic. So my word is Marabou. Thank you.
Thank you.
I'd just add to Eddie's point, like sort of been thinking, I want to write a paper on it, but all those buzzwords, nature-based solution, nature positive, nature repair markets, natural capital, I want to flip it from an Indigenous point of view and have cultural-based solutions, cultural positive, cultural repair market or country repair market, and cultural capital. Because, you know, I think if you're caring and repairing and remediating these places based on cultural outputs, you get all the others as well on top. You'll get species protected, you'll get land, you'll get re-veg, you'll get all these, but I know that'll never happen, but I'll keep pushing it, keep pushing.
But you have me on board, but the challenge is to get the others on board as well.
Yeah.
So that's where, and I know that there are big discussions going on, because often what you see is if you can create something for somebody, then somebody else has to give in. And that means that you need this say acceptance and also awareness about what are the benefits, and also to accept that if you don't get direct benefits out of it, then the indirect benefits can be as valuable or even more than the direct benefits. And I think there are many examples on things that are happening like that. But that's I think where one of our challenges is to see how we can demonstrate that.
Yeah, I mean, I think so. You're all talking about this, the investment, the funding, and I mean, any session we've been to in this week has been impossible to not come up on that. And I think that's where the world's cultural heritage and everything, it becomes difficult because you can't always value it in monetary terms. So I really like the way that you're sort of trying to flip it on the head. But how can we flip it on the head and convince people that that's the way forward and that's the way to think of it, when everyone's talking about, you know, business interest, profitability, these type of words that are the ones in the capitalist market we have right now. Yeah, question. Yeah.
Wait a sec, because the mic, if not, we cannot hear you.
I will. It's probably going to be on the same lines. Hello, my name is Cristal Angie. I am from Colombia. I work in an NGO called the Heritage Foundation. And I think in our experience, 20 years working in, you know, all around Colombia with indigenous, non-indigenous, peasant, nature conservation, our big thing is the fact that we divide and separate, kind of like what Alejandro was saying with the laws, and in the way that we organize projects, and thinking cultural heritage is different from natural heritage, that's where the problem starts. And so most of the projects, when they become focused, let's say, on the climate change adaptation, thinking that that doesn't have anything to do with the local culture. And it's evident, and the biggest lesson that we have learned is that if any kind of project, whether it's climate adaptation or biodiversity or gender action, if it doesn't take into account the local culture, it's not really going to make sense. And the problem with that is that we have a lot of projects that appear to be a success on paper, the implementation and the, and at the end, but when you look at the projects, again, a lot of the times we never really delved into how do the people do it. And we were at a recent another session about falling failures, or I'm getting the name wrong, but yeah, failing forward. And one of the examples I gave was this project about jaguar conservation, and how we had all the scientific way of looking at the jaguar and making sure we knew the ecosystemic routes. But the project wasn't successful until we start saying, well, how do local indigenous people conserve the jaguar? And they do it in a way that has nothing to do with ecosystemic measurements and data. It has to do with the spirit of the rock. It has to do with the spirit of the jaguar energy. And if you don't blend those in, things are going to be, they're going to be just a project. So I also want to talk about landscapes, but I think Liliana is going to go into the landscape-based solutions, right?
No, that's for sure. That's for sure. No, but what I see a lot when we talk about planning and we try to do spatial planning, the governance boundaries that we draw around areas do not match with the cultural heritage areas. So the people have another, type of landscape that the planners or the governance people have. And as long as those two don't match, that's also very difficult. It's for a reason that in the Netherlands, the borders of the water authorities are very different from the provincial ones, because they look at a water entity and not at a governance board or anything. So we should also be able to overcome that governance boundaries and stuff, and just look what is a logical entity for the local people, inheriting the land, living in the land, and from that perspective start planning bottom up, including definitely the local culture, and taking that as a starting point. So what Christophe, I think, was mentioning is that we started to collecting with a group, and we try from the COP biodiversity, we work with the local people from Colombia. Now we had a woman from Nepal coming in, a lot of people here in the room added to our map. We start collecting these this knowledge and these examples that exist, and it also have proven to be also have monetary value. And I think the proof where the moderator was asking for is there. I mean, I saw a project in Cape Town where the Europeans planted the wrong tree species a long time ago. And that's also causing the water burden there. And now they are hand by hand taking all those wrong trees out and replanting with the indigenous trees, the local trees from South Africa. And you see the water comes back, the nature restores, and the money comes back as well. So this project, it is a lot of volunteers who take out by hand all those seedlings, and it's going to take years. But they have proof, also monetary proof, that if you do this with the local people, it is good money for value. So I think there are examples. We just need to make sure that they end up at the right tables where the decision makers are thinking on all these type of things.
Yeah, that's great. I also have. I'll take one more, and then I'm going to bring it back to our panelists here. To
You promised something to the room, eh? So you have.
Yeah, I did promise, and I'm getting a lot of engagement, which is really exciting. So that's great. Thank you. Please say who you work for as well.
Thank you so much. I'm Sobia from Hunza, Pakistan, which is in Hindu Kush Himalayan region. My question is about what is the role of loss and damage fund in helping communities or facilitating communities to adapt to nature protect their heritage, because this is what I have personally experienced. Due to weather anomalies and gulf in North Pakistan, it is not only impacting the tangible culture infrastructure, but we are also losing our festivals, which were coming from weather cycle and water. And we used to have a great reverence for water sources, and we used to have shrines which people used to go and revere them. But now these things are changing, and water is becoming a kind of a dangerous entity, and people have now fear of water. And secondly, since the region that I come from is marginalized, and those voices are not on the table, and how do you think the Loss and Damage Fund could help people to repair or to protect their identities? Because climate change is actually, it is, I don't have a word, obscuring our identities when we just see it as a climate change, is a scientific challenge, it's a cultural challenge for us. So what do you think, if there's a role of loss and damage in facilitating communities to adapt to nature to protect their heritage? Thank you.
Yeah, if I may answer that last question, and then I will make a little bit of a provoking statement as well. One thing is that making use of those funds is often a national initiative. So that means that the national government also has to acknowledge that they would like to have this repaired, and then they can also go for a funding proposal in there. And getting this national interest is already a big step forward, because often you're talking about a small part of the country. So it's not sure that the national government also sees the priority as big as the local community sees. So that's a challenge already on its own. And then another one, and that's maybe a little bit a provoking statement, is that I think it's also good that we should realize that we cannot keep everything that we had in the past. So it's, I think, very important to have this past also as a starting point for our thinking and what we want to do. But I do think that we have to be also, in a number of cases, realistic enough that there are changes that we cannot prevent. But the challenge is then, can we guide it in a direction that I think should have a stronger value of what comes actually from, for me, I think a more natural way of living together with the environment than we're doing. And there I see a lot of things going wrong, because then the choice is quite often economic choice, and that's not always, I think, the right decisions to be made. But we have to be careful that we cannot keep everything that we had in the past in there as well. And sometimes it may help to think forward, but be also the person that decides on the direction where you would like to go for, instead of only being seen as, say, the group who doesn't want to look forward and is holding up certain developments. So it's a difficult choice that we have to make in some cases. And just to give you a very small example, in the Netherlands, we have what we a sand engine. It has to do with the fact that we're dealing with sea level rise. And what they did is they defined a way how they could put sand actually in the flow of the sea. And by doing that, they are assuring that the islands are slowly growing up. But it also means that the way how the ecosystem is behaving in the northern part, where the islands are, is changing slowly. And it means that the fishermen who were living from that environment have to reduce the way how they were living. And the normal way that they had in the past. So it's a choice that has been made. I think it's a choice that primarily also had the nature in the back of their mind, which for me personally I think is a good choice, but we should realize that those fishermen were, I think, not benefiting from that solution as we would have hoped to be able to do that. So for them, another solution had to come. And I think that's sometimes also difficult that solution is not there.
I see my co.
Yeah.
You're writing.
Yeah, I've got heaps. I can go for hours. To a point, the challenge is for the Indigenous voice in this sort of space. It's hard unless you're publishing evidence. If you're in that space, you're producing evidence that is peer-reviewed, is then in the open world, and then your voice is part of that. And I think that's I'll just sort of live that through banging on with IPCC, saying Indigenous local knowledges should be considered for Assessment Report 7. So we've seen a lot of talk. So AR6, in the lead-up documents, there was one mention of Indigenous knowledge. AR7, there's been 18 mentions in the planning documents for AR7. So we've seen a real shift at that level. And, I'm very privileged to be now a lead author in the science chapter of Working Group 1. So, whether that's to shut me up, I don't know. But I've been banging on about it, and maybe that's time. And then Eddie mentioned living museums. And so, my son went over and he caught up with the Martawarra, so the Fitzroy River in Western Australia is now a living museum, which is fantastic. And there was only 3 Aboriginal people from Australia at the World Water Forum out of 30,000 people. So I suppose there was a poor representation there. But like the other aspect of the Martawarra, which is the river, I was a co-editor of a journal, and one of the chapters that were talking about the Martawarra, the river itself, put the river as first author. And that nearly blew up the whole journal system. So it wasn't a human, it was a river as first author. And so that river is now citable. So Martawarra, River of Life, is first author. So I suppose that's another way to influence the system. We also I did another journal, and we had one of the abstracts written in an Aboriginal language. So, that was rather than French or Spanish, or which some of those journals request, we had an Indigenous group do their own abstract in their own language, which was really cool. Yeah.
Yeah, Amanda.
Yeah.
In North Island, you got the Whanganui in North Island, New Zealand, the river that's got a legal status, living legal status. No development can happen without talking to the river or its custodians. Sorry, I just wanted to... So there's 2, one that Brad pointed out, and then Aotearoa. So there's
one in Colombia too.
Colombia, the Ganga River.
So
India,
so you've got evidence in front of you that you can draw on. Sorry.
I think that need to make yourself heard is very important. But what I'm listening to also is that you're saying that if you don't do that, you're not included.
Yeah.
And actually, there is a role for governance here to support that with the human rights-based approach. And although it's an international law, it's recognised as an obligation for all governance to behave in that way. It's not necessarily integrated into law. And that ability to involve the community in decision-making, to give them the government needs to give the obligation for that to happen rather than for it to be a nice to have. And that's one of the things that are holding back that community discussion. And if you look at some of the decisions about cultural heritage, there isn't that trust to let the community make the decision because it's considered a national icon or it's owned by the government and therefore the community doesn't have the right to do so. But actually that needs to be changed, and there needs to be more community-based decision-making to preserve cultural heritage. It's just not, it's not starting at the right end. It's starting top-down instead of bottom-up, and that can be supported by law. So that is one of the options that we have.
Yeah, so I want to take us then into, because we were talking about the fragmentation, both at the global level, but also down to the local scale in terms of the spatial planning and all the fragmentation across, which also links to the governance. But do you know of any policies, whether at the global level or down, and talking about these rivers which now have their own rights? Are there any examples of other these policies or other frameworks from the global level and all the way down that support the protection of natural heritage, particularly in the face of these climate events that are coming up? And are they working? Can we go a bit into that?
Yeah, I think there are some examples, but I don't think that there are many. One of them is what I just mentioned about the sea level rise. I think that's one way on how to protect there. Another particular case, but there I know that there is also a law in place and effective measures there, but I don't think it's mainly about cultural heritage. It's about protection in general. And that is related, we were talking about droughts and floods, but I think forest fires are an outcome of that are very disruptive actually in that way. And of course, there are, I think, measures in place to protect things in general, but I don't think in those measures there is space specifically for certain cultural heritage parts. So I think, and I'm talking about, say, climate events, because there are other events as well. But I think that is not really happening there. I know that for areas here, like we have in Sweden and Norway, there, if you look at that, and that's also for some other low-lying countries, there are a lot of cities that are very close, actually, to the sea level. And I think in there, there is a lot of discussion going on about how to protect that. And one way is by building a seawall. But the big disadvantage of building a seawall in there is that you disconnect actually the community completely from the environment that they are also depending on and living with. And I think that is also a very difficult one to solve. And I think what I see happening is that there is a bigger interest in trying to solve that. So I think there's a bigger willingness actually to invest more in solutions that keep open those possibilities than in the past. So I see in that way a positive development in there, but I think it requires still a lot of push actually to really make this happen in more places.
No, it's fine. It's fine. I think we have a mic here. Thank you. Thank you, Amanda, because you realized that I wanted to say something. But before going into that, I just wanted to respond to your query, because I was thinking about, you place a lot of emphasis on the remedies, on the loss and damage. And I think that the legal response has to be preventive. So law to be effective has to be also preventive, has to find a way, instead of looking at the remedy purely, loss and damage, so how can we anticipate the problem to happen? And this is, I think, the way to turn the whole thing around. And to turn the whole thing around in this discussion, rights of nature, you're asking for an example on that. We have probably here people that are familiar with that in Australia, people in Latin America also, landscapes, rivers, species that are declared to have legal personality. There are countries that are in the forefront of that. I've been doing a lot of work in some of them. So how do you implement that in practice? How do we make sure that it's not perceived as a naive solution? Because this is actually the problem. So giving rights to nature, giving rights to an orangutan, for example, in my home country, what does it mean? That an orangutan can appear before court, or a river can appear before the court? So how can we make sure that a solution like that is embedded in cultural issues, is really one of the way forwards for the problem that we're discussing here? And this is what I would like to discuss, perhaps, and get your views on that, guys.
I have an example of prevention,
Okay.
and it's a 1947 law in the UK for the National Parks and Conservation Act, where, as a result, about 25% or a quarter of the land in the UK is protected.
Mm-hmm.
And it's also got something like 15 national parks and 47 areas of outstanding natural beauty.
Yeah.
They cannot develop in those lands. They're there for the community. They have complete public access.
Yeah.
So they have both the access for the community, but also they have the natural protection. They managed to do that before the old adage that, shut the stable door before the horse has bolted.
Mm-hmm.
And unfortunately, in a lot of parts of the world, we don't have the facility to go back 75 years to protect things before it happened. But there is opportunity still to do that in a lot of places. Obviously, we should be looking beyond that for restoration as well. But prevention in terms of natural disasters clearly it's even a further step, isn't it? It's thinking, how do we prevent flooding and droughts? What can we do that's interventionist, but nature-based? And that's really the tricky
And
thing.
cultural base, Amanda, I would say, that was said already here, and understanding that some of those solutions that are perceived to be a bit naive, that thinking that the earth is our mother, like in Latin America, is perceived, is Mother Earth, La Pachamama, Summa Causai, and so on and so forth, are solutions that can help us to overcome this dilemma between culture, water, climate, and so on and so forth.
And I agree, but I think there is a long way to go. And just to give one example there, we are a Category 2 center of UNESCO, so we deal quite a lot with UNESCO. And as you know, UNESCO has 3 pillars. One is the science side, another one is education, other one is cultural heritage. So cultural heritage is an important one, and then cities or other places can be designated as a cultural heritage part. If you will look at the requirements that are there on when you can become eligible to become a cultural heritage site, you will find out that there are a lot of questions to be filled in. But what's missing there is quite often the impact of climate extreme events, actually, through water on those cultural heritage sites. So the cultural heritage site can be a part of a city, but that city culturally is depending actually on the wetlands upstream is quite often not that clear, and that those wetlands can be treated by droughts or other events that may take place is not an integral part of this decision and protection that you require if you want to sustain such cultural heritage. So I think that we should relook at the different instruments that we have in place, how we can improve them by having this part also in those, I think, instruments that we have that can help to protect and improve cultural heritage.
Yeah, I just want to add too, so the cultural heritage one, so there was one recently in Australia, the Budge Bim landscape. So it was a eel landscape. It was created by a volcano, and they have stories going back to that volcano eruption, and that's 34,000 years ago. So it's lived experience. So it is now a cultural landscape under UNESCO. But I suppose the other challenges is unless, they tried to get sort of national and state and things like that. But once they have international recognition, the local governments respond, because it might be too late sometimes. Like even Phil and I's country, the Guida wetlands, there's Ramsar sites within that wetland system, but it's only a state conservation area. It'll never be a national park because of the opportunity of coal seam gas underneath. So we have that challenge of its international recognition, but the state at local level will not recognise it for what it is with regards to, the ecological, but also the cultural value. So, you have that fight. Another one is Booba Lagoon, which our people hold significance, part of ceremony. We have a strong dreaming story there. And there used to be water skiers on it, all over it. And we have an ancient serpent in our storyline that lives in the deep water holes. So we couldn't get state protection. We went to at a national level, and so a lot of our cousins and ancestors fought that hard. So now the water skiers got moved off our sacred lagoon, but they got their own lagoon now, which is also sacred, but that's another story. But they, that challenge is, that lagoon be recognised as a cultural landscape, you know what I mean? That's our challenge as well. But you don't have the funds to fight, yeah.
Thank you. So I think we've done whole circle here. We've gone from the local level up to the national, up to the global frameworks, how they can support, but then going back all the way down and how it might work or not, depending on the different frameworks and how they're represented and acknowledged at the different levels of governance. And I want to take then us back down then to community engagement. Oh, sorry. Before I do that, if you want to jump in on this, we'll do that, and then we'll go back to community engagement.
I have a brief question on what we can do as, let's say, people who are acting for a future where cultural heritage and nature-based solutions and communities are taken into account in different institutions. When we take into account all these dimensions, it's also watering down the specificity of the solutions in a way. Now, if we all do this, what is the trajectory? How are we going to shake off the rigid structures? Because institutions have mandates and they don't want to change. So how do we translate this? I also agree that the ticking off project success is not the times when I'm happy about, oh, something has changed, really. That's very quiet moments often, and nobody notices. Not nobody, but not the institutions. But we cannot all create projects that take into account all the dimensions while still having a focus. We need to have a change in the structures. How do we go about this?
Do you think?
I was just sort of thinking of that, maybe just in general, so it comes normal, we change the narrative. So it's everyone, the climate has changed. It's not climate change, it's change. We're living it, and mitigation's still important, but we have to adapt now. So a lot smaller, like Malika's island in Fiji, South Pacific, the Torres Strait in Northern Australia, a lot of our coastal systems, they're feeling the brunt of climate change now. They have to adapt. So I suppose could we flip the research paradigm or even the language, just start talking about a changed climate, not it's coming or it's in the future, it's here now with us. And I suppose the other thing I was thinking about was the Sami and our connection. There's some stories, parallels, when we're fighting the green economy. So, they have the issue of having some rare earth elements and lithium potentially on their reindeer lands. Whereas in Australia, a lot of Aboriginal communities have rare earth elements as well. But if you fight the green economy, and I suppose then that's when the NGOs might start attacking you because you're against the green economy, but you don't want a big hole in the ground. You want your reindeer lands, or you want your traditional lands, your groundwater systems that are healthy. So I suppose we're in a real, that's a nexus. That's a real challenge. And, we feel their pain because we're feeling it as well in Australia. There are individual communities that are under the threat where, it could be even coal seam gas. My country fought the mob against 850 coal seam gas wells going into a recharge area of one of our ancient groundwater systems. But the law prevailed and Santos got an approval. So they're going to puncture the earth 850 times for coal seam gas. Can't do anything. We can't veto. We can't say no. Yeah.
Thank you. And so I'm going to bring you back into, because you were talking about projects and you were talking about how the timeline and the donor sort of cycle really is difficult in terms of these type of projects. And it doesn't make any sense really when we think about the way, this is our cultural heritage. It's not something that you can do in 4 years or 5 years or so do you have an
that was exactly what I was going to respond to from your question, because I see the same issue around water and sanitation projects where we know that the solution needs to be to include vulnerable people that don't have water and sanitation. But the projects are measured on how many people have access to water. And so, of course, it goes to the ones who already have or who can afford it. So there's a mismatch between how the projects are designed and what we're really aiming to do. And I think it's the same with cultural heritage. We should be measuring it on some of those more qualitative, culturally based aspects, not we've managed to stem the flow so it's no longer flooding the city. It should be we are achieving it to enable people's culture to continue in the way that people want to live, to recognize those values and have those as the KPIs for the projects so that we don't measure the wrong thing. I think we're measuring the wrong thing. And then the projects themselves can be designed around adaptation for a different reason, they'll be designed differently, and they'll be reported differently, and we'll hopefully see some different results.
Was there a question from that? Okay.
It's question as well as a little bit of sharing an experience. As we have really discussed that things are fragmented and how to make it in the national priority. So I am Rajiv, I am from India, and I work with Ganga River Rejuvenation Mission. So what happened, apart from various things, the rivers are also very strong cultural identity. So we took up, but often we don't know all those things in a scientifically what all the heritage. So we did kind of mapping of tangible, intangible, as well as natural heritage along that. And then try to bring the other stakeholders into their conservation plan. So that's one, perhaps some reflection from your side. Is heritage part of the river basin management plans, etc., how it has been done? But we are trying to do it, and to some extent it has been successful, but of course challenges are there. And second thing is we also, every country, and India certainly has a very rich water heritage. Normally we go for the cultural heritage, so it's a monument or a built structure, but there is a lot of water related structure also. So we are identifying water heritage structures in the country. Everything will not be internationally recognized, some of them are, but we are trying to give national recognition and trying to develop a plan how they can come into the rescue, how they can come in the protection, etc. So maybe if there is something like water heritage structures identification globally, maybe you can tell us, so that will also help. But I think, as has been also told by some other place, rallying around certain government programs or larger missions, if we put this, normally it doesn't come, because we will try to save life of people and property when a flood or climate impact comes. But I think if we embed the cultural heritage also as part of values to be protected, we know it traditionally, but it doesn't come administratively. So I think that kind of efforts we are doing. But I think we'll be very happy to see, especially about identification of these kind of water heritage structures, and then how we take it forward to a more global level.
Thank you. And I think this builds us in particularly the first question with the stakeholders. We can also look at the role of local communities in these plans and how we get the local communities to engage in this framework. So you look ready to answer. So
yeah, because I think actually India, and you mentioned the Ganges, I think it's a really nice example where I think the spiritual strength of the river being a god is, I think, something that I think in the last decades maybe have been not acknowledged enough, but I see a change happening there, and that's not only for the Ganges as a river. I think you see that also for the step wells that are becoming a part actually of the way how people think about the value of water and the environment. And I think this awareness is, as far as I see, a super important starting point if you want to also implement laws, make changes. And then you can also think about protecting a certain cultural heritage site, because in the river you also have a number of constructions that are centuries old, and if you want to maintain them, you have to put investments in there to make sure that's there. But the willingness to invest is only coming if the society, and it starts locally, but it should become bigger, and I think that's happening in India. That society as a whole also sees the value of such an investment and protection.
Any?
I think also one of the things is the silos in how things are managed. And, I'm trained in groundwater, but, the surface water, groundwater people don't really talk to each other. We're both special in our own way. But I think it's making sure that, but Aboriginal people, Indigenous people will see those waters as connected waters, surface water, groundwater, they interact, they flow. Rivers only flow sometimes because of groundwater inputs, and sometimes groundwater is recharged from rivers. So that's an example, is that we have to break down those silos to get areas to talk to each other. One thing I wanted to talk about was that another term is rewilding. Have you heard of de-extinction? Have you heard that one? That's where bringing back species that are extinct. In Australia, there was some funds thrown at the Tasmanian tiger and thylacine. So I suppose, have they spoken to the Indigenous people? That would have been a cultural species. That would have been a significant species. It's a predator. It's at the top of the food chain when it was in existence on the Australian mainland before the end of the last ice age, and then when it was in Tasmania, which was right down the bottom. So that would have been a species that was culturally significant. And then, the wording as well, rewilding. Australia was never wild. There was people there. Yeah. So, and our challenge is, how do we get cultural species recognised at national level? If they're culturally significant entities or cultural keystone species. They are the top. They are the one that you want to protect most. But they are also the one, when your traditional lands are healthy, they're the ones that are on your land. So how do we get that in there?
Yeah, but I think what you sometimes see is that those species are then also symbolic. So they can be very strong symbols, actually, that may help in this protection. And in the Ganges you have the dolphins, in the Rhine you have the salmon. So a number of those species can really help also on creating this awareness and making people aware that if you are interested in those species, and often they are embraced as a sort of national symbol as well, that you have to make efforts to make that happen. And I think things like that are really helpful.
I think governments need courage.
Yeah.
They need a lot of courage. Yeah.
Maria, you wanted to speak about community engagement.
I was trying to get us back to community engagement.
I listened to you, and then we went all the way around. Yeah. Fine, but let me say something about that.
Thank you.
Because you asked about, community engagement, and we tend to put that issue, and I just want to perhaps to share my feelings and my thinking with you, all in the corner of participation, right? So the answer to that is public participation, right? So we need public participation laws, we need public participation agreements. Now in Latin America, the region I come from, we have our own convention, different from the Aarhus Convention on public participation, access to information, and access to justice. Is that the end of the journey? I'm asking myself as a simple lawyer. Or is it something else what we need? And I would like to get back to your point. How do we make the change happen? Is it participation the answer? Or is it much more than that? Is it perhaps inclusion what we need to think about when we're thinking and meaning about cultural issues, community engagement, community involvement, and probably participation is not the only answer, and it's probably not the end of the story. So probably what we need is much more than that, is to rethink how the law, the institutions, and the governance framework has worked so far. We need probably to democratize in many ways how the law was conceived. It was created by a group of people, for a group of people, ignoring an enormous amount of people, the indigenous populations, the local communities, and so on and so forth. And therefore, what I'm thinking is, if we think about community engagement, yes, public participation is one answer, but it's not the end of the story. And perhaps that's my little contribution to what you wanted to ask, Maria, from a legal perspective.
Yeah.
And maybe before we go there, what I would like to add there, that even with public participation in place, because I think there are quite some laws that do that, I don't think it's working out in the way that we were hoping for. So that's another challenge in there.
I mean, what about the language barriers? What about the travel barriers? What about, the tickets? Sometimes people do not even have access to all of that. I mean, how many people come here, from the communities and the local level? Yeah. Yes. I mean, how do we ponder all that in the reality so that we have full representation and inclusion, not only participation?
So I think the key thing here is that with participation, to make it meaningful, you have to listen to what people say. Yeah. And it's often symbolic. Yeah. That's where the law can help, but actually there needs to be a willingness by government to listen as well. And so the laws need to be constructed in a way that enable people to participate in a meaningful way. If I think about one of the better examples in the UK, in the Lake District, where they've done a lot of work around conservation and involving land users, the farmers, looking at the typical way that they, and customary use of the land as well. The way that they farm the land, the way that the stone walls, the cultural aspects, these have been managed. They've managed to keep a lot of those traditional cultures, even though it's a natural landscape, because they've blended it and looked holistically at the cultural way that we use the land, not just nature for its own sake. So that holistic view, with the number of people we have in the world, we can't just say nature has to be conserved on its own. We are part of nature, and the way that we use it is really important, and people have to find a way to be heard. And as you say, it's exclusive, the way that you actually have to use money and resources to really get meaningful participation, and that isn't going to happen without legislation and budgets.
Thank you. I had three questions from the audience. We're going to start with the man behind there. Was first, then we do the lady there and the man in the corner by the wall there. Okay.
I'm thinking of the way to getting my point into the discussion. My name is Manfred Matz. I have been working as a water management advisor, policy advisor in about 40 countries in the world since more than 30 years. And and I'm working in water resources management and water supply as well. So before coming into this room, I was asking myself, is this the right theme for me? And let's put exactly this point on the table. I see there is some kind of split between this discussion about nature protection, cultural heritage, and nature being a cultural heritage, and these things. It's a bit like this corner of endangered species, NGOs, something like that, and the real strong water management, as I'm an engineer as well. But however, through all my life, I advised the governments I worked with to make a separation between water use for irrigation and water supply and water protection. And in order to do that, to put, for example, this task of water protection, water resource management and protection into a different ministry, for example, the Ministry of Environment. Yeah. I actually never achieved, but, this is actually the point I want to make. You know, there is a bit of a separate corner that nature and all these discussion about nature and water resources and close to nature is actually there. And I think it's a really, really big issue to get this closer together. Even when you follow the other sessions here, it is something like watershed management is something like an add-on to WASH. And it's not, a resource management where you have to take into consideration heritage points of view. This is the point I want to make. Thank you.
Thank you. We'll take the 3 questions and then we'll get the panelists to answer.
Thank you. Great panel, very interesting. I'm Amma, I'm from the University of Queensland, so also from Australia, and I just wanted to continue on about some of the public consultation work. Like, I work in academia, I look at water quality impacts on human health and also coral reefs, and yet I only found out that like the Queensland body that is looking after water quality and protecting catchments for the Great Barrier Reef, one of our biggest World Heritage ecosystems, is taking public consultation for how they're going to be better monitoring and evaluating water quality benefits. Just recently, I only found out it's happening now, so if anyone wants to comment, I guess it's coming up soon, but that's how segregated it is. So even me being like in this position, very technical position, only found out by just like happening to attend a seminar. So I guess some feedback I was hoping to get is like, what is something that would be helpful to provide feedback to for this kind of a body that is looking over like a really large area of space, thousands of kilometers, lots of different indigenous groups as well, and lots of different uses, lots of different people, and there's like so many different co-benefits, and a lot of them aren't tangible as, like for example, often the government will utilize stats on like tourism incomes, fisheries production, things like that. But there's so many intrinsic values like cultural heritage, biodiversity that are very hard to value. And so is it just a matter of trying to put that in when you're doing a public consultation process? If you're trying to put together a report like that, just really emphasizing those values? Is there more that I could do, or any of us could do for your local context, I guess? Yeah.
Thank you. And then you're the last question for this round.
Hi there, my name's Tyler. I'm a city planning student in the United States. I don't know if this is so much a question as an idea, and maybe some reflection would be great, but I keep thinking about the role of early childhood education in all this. And I mean, in some ways, I feel like we're waiting for some spiritual awakening that someone's going to say, oh, I finally see the earth as my mother. And, like, is that going to happen for someone who spent their life, making their living off of extraction and off of violence? Like, probably not. So how do we get to people from an earlier age? And are there any examples in which education has been a part of this work to really ground cultural heritage so that people are learning multiple languages, they're learning a local language, they're learning to see the earth as their mother from, a young age rather than when they've been an adult who's, experienced the world in a very different way.
Thank you. Okay, so we have these 3 questions, and we're going to move on to Mentimeter afterwards. So I'd like to recap. So we have looking at the culture, heritage, and water resources management, and how to do that in the ministries. And and then we had the question on the public consultations and how we should sort of make sure people find out about it, how to reach people, and how to add the values into it. And we had the educational question, like how to get this into education from an early stage. So I guess each panelist can pick one question, and hopefully we'll get all 3 of them answered.
I will try to be very brief. I think what you see, for example, in Europe, you have the Water Framework Directive. In this Water Frame Directive, there is an obligation actually to consult and have participation in there. I'm not saying that's working out in the way that you would like, and I think one of the discussions that we are having here is about how cultural heritage can play a role in there, because that's often not taken on board. What you see is that there is, of course, quite often a sort of economic or natural interest, so those parties will be there. Often they are also represented in stages. So how that is being organized in the country can be very different from one to the other. The framework could work, but I think it would be quite important to get also more, acknowledgement of the value of cultural heritage. And that, I'm living in the Netherlands. It's a big discussion there as well, how to get cultural heritage in that discussion. Because often it's also seen as something that's blocking investments or new developments in there. And I think in some cases it may be, but in some cases I think people step over it too easily and are not acknowledging the value that it can have as well. And the value that I see in there is mainly also to get the people living in this area also accepting some of the other measures that are taking place. So that's, I think, an important part in there. And I would be super interested to see if together we can push that water becomes an integral part of the curriculum on primary schools. Because I know that water has attention, but often it's a side thing, so it depends on the teacher quite much. And I think it would be really nice if it could become, say, a part of the official curriculum of primary schools, because I think that's a starting point to create value for water in a lot of different ways. So I hope that together we will manage to do that.
Thank you. 1 minute each.
Yeah, nobody said consultation was easy, and I've done quite a bit myself at community level, and it takes years to actually get to an outcome where everybody is happy or relatively happy with the result. There isn't a shortcut, is what I would say, and I think what Eddie was saying, and both of you were saying earlier about the financial value of cultural heritage. You can value the benefits. If we're valuing tourism, we can also value the fisheries. We can value the times that's lost or the culture that's lost. It may not be very PC to do so, but actually, if you don't put an economic value on people's cultural heritage, then it's not going to be considered on an equal footing, I think. That's my feeling about it.
Oh, I think that.
You don't want to.
Can you hear me through that one? Oh, yeah. Water, culture, nature. So I've been doing that for a number of years, and I suppose how to include it all is important. And then I suppose it's the way we value water is thinking about it. And so there'll be certain things that need water, and then from an Indigenous point of view, cultural aspects will need water, whether it's ceremony or plants or cultural species or whatever else. But the way we value water as the essence of life, not as a commodity, and that's where we are. That's where we are. Water quality resources. So do you know the Australian, New Zealand fresh and marine water quality guidelines? Okay, so within that, there's a framework to engage Indigenous people, but also principles on how to engage Indigenous people. So Queensland Government should be using it because they were part of its development in 2018. Indigenise the curricula. Yeah, like it's very important, starting from early childhood all the way to university. We're slowly influencing in the Australian context. So yeah, we've generated a lot of curricula at certain levels, so it's there available, and I think other countries, might be doing it or they could learn from it. So I think University of Melbourne has a whole suite of curricula that is indigenised on water, fire and astronomy from an Indigenous point of view. So there's opportunities there. Engagement, I think I said it in one of my other panels, we're tired of being engaged, we want to get married. And the other one is you've got 2 ears. When you're engaging, you've got 2 ears and 1 mouth. So you've got to do double the listening.
I was just thinking, how you make sure that, for example, a child, instead of when you ask a boy, I don't know, my home country, I'm thinking about my nephew, where do you think that a tomato comes from? And he will say it's from the supermarket. That we turn it around and we show him that the tomato doesn't come from the supermarket, that comes from nature. And that certainly requires a long way to go in educational terms. You said indigenize and so on and so forth. Yes, but it will have to change radically and completely the way that we bring nature into the educational systems. So that's the answer to your question. It requires a revolution in radical terms. And perhaps, the answer to your question that you already answer, much more from an Australia point of view, is how do we move from consultation into consent? And there is something, in legal terms, that is gaining a lot of traction, that is the FP, the free prior informed consent. That it is interpreted in different ways depending on the jurisdiction. Is it mandatory or isn't it mandatory? And then I will say what we need to do is to make it mandatory, because that's the only way for this transformation to happen.
Thank you. So we're going to see if there's people online as well now to get them to engage as well. So the way we're going to do that is we're going to get a Mentimeter up, and everyone can put their phones out. It's the 5th day of this week. We all know how Mentimeter works. There's going to be a code. Oh, there's a QR code that you can scan with your phone, and you should be going into a Mentimeter PowerPoint. Is everyone in there now? No, not yet. You can't use 2 phones. That's double voting. Can everyone access? Okay, we move to the next. I think, is there a next slide after this where we can see the results? It's
coming.
It's coming. Okay. So the first question is, let me see. Yeah, it's about your organization or who you work for or where you're sort of linked to. Are you working on projects that consider both climate adaptation and cultural heritage? So it should be a yes or no question. Yep, you can see that, I think.
The question was already on your phone, or at least I had it on my phone.
Oh, so you could already vote.
It would be nice to see the result on screen, if that's possible.
Okay.
Thank you.
Hold on. And then you can start thinking about the second question, which is going to be, based on your experience, what are the key challenges that you see in this area of research? And you're going to get to pick 3, which is looking at limited grants, lack of understanding, weak policy and regulations, lack of community engagement, short-term focus, lack of investment, and perceived lack of return on investment. But that's the next question after this one. I'm trying to.
Are you changing the slides?
The next question is coming.
Oh, the next question should be there on your phone now. So you choose 2 responses. So based on your experience, what are the key challenges you see in this area of research? Let me know when you've answered. I mean, we've spoken a lot about most of these already, so it's interesting also to see if the session has made any contributions to that. We're not seeing the responses though. No. Okay. And then the final question, which I'm guessing will take then the presenters to do in their own, was supposed to be on, based on the presentation today, what keywords express what you have, like what you've taken from this session. So even if it's not available on your computer, like on your screens, I'm also happy to hear you shout it in the room. I don't know what have you taken out of this debate today? Courage. Change starts with yourself. Mm-hmm. Sorry? It was a rich interaction. Thank you. Rights of nature. That's great. Make FPIC mandatory, actually mandatory. More people in the room? No keywords.
I think it should be the next topic for the World Water Week, right? Something like that.
Excellent. And with that, I'm also going to let the panelists say, based on today's discussion, what are you taking away from it? What are your sort of concluding remarks, let's say?
Very short. I think I found this an encouraging meeting, and I think it's nice to hear so many people interested in the topic. I also see a big challenge that we have ahead, but I also see a way forward there. So I would be quite interested how I can support your proposition to make it mandatory. So if you know how I can help with that, I would be super interested.
Next. Amanda, concluding remarks?
Sorry, I was busy doing the Mentimeter thing, so you've got the results there to share with everybody. I think that there needs to be more emphasis on...
You need to have a microphone.
Yeah, so with climate adaptation, I see cultural heritage as a way of making sure we do it right and really thinking about all aspects of climate adaptation, not just the technical side, but also thinking about people and the impacts it's going to have on them and making sure that we consult with everybody. So I think it's a way of improving the way that we do things.
I was just thinking about de-extinction because one day some of these Indigenous leaders that we have in this room and that have been here throughout the week, we might need to clone them now just to make sure that they're into the future having their impact. So that's not really de-extinction, but it's more preservation. That's the word I was looking for. But I think that the opportunity is obviously consultation is important, but it's throughout the whole process. It's not just sending an email, sending a fax in the old school days or something like that. You've got to engage early, build that trust, have those cups of tea, as I've said before, and that takes time. So it's allowing for the time, but then you also need to make sure that they are part of at that table, you know, especially for Indigenous people. A lot of the times we're not even in the same room or in the same building. We're down the street struggling to find out where the room is. And if we're at the table, we have that opportunity, so that FPIC comes into it. Free, prior, informed consent is important. So I think, yeah, that'll do me. Thank you.
And not just a photo, right? Because this is what happens many times. And I think it's important also to mix ourselves, not only to have, you know, the fora for Indigenous peoples, but also for everybody, so that the conversation flows in both ways, so that we learn from each other. So that's the beginning of the change, I would say. Participation, not the end of the story, right the beginning.
Thank you. Great. And I do have the answers from the Mentimeter here. So there's about 13 of us that have work in things that consider climate adaptation and cultural heritage, and then about half of that don't do it, and about another half that maybe. So there's some way to go, but it's also very good to see that there are organizations and people that are working in this intersection.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. It's okay. Yeah. That's fine. Hey, there we go. Thank you, Detective. We can go to the next one. There, and this is how you see where the key challenges are. The biggest are in the lack of understanding of the nexus, the limited grants for these kinds, and then weak policy regulations and lack of community engagement, all topics that we've spoken about. So hopefully this discussion today has also given some thoughts on how to move that forward. And then the last slide is a little bit more keywords. So we have to be in the same room, actual change, Mother Nature, reverse the flow, legislation, preservation, legal personality, evidence, inclusion, rich interaction, not the wilderness, inspiration for future, Pachamama, make FPIC mandatory, I think that's what it's supposed to say, and community engagement and rights of nature. And with that, I want to thank you and any online audience for this. It's been a great discussion. Thank you so much.